Well, welcome folks to 2022. This is our medical valuation lab fireside chat. We're definitely not at dockside yet, hoping to get there sometime soon. We're pleased, Tom and I are pleased to have with us Angela Gillespie, who has an incredible career. We're going to get into that in a second. Just as a reminder, this program in part is supported by the Carlson Global Institute's new Global Medical Industry MBA program, now with a scholarship if you're an overseas student through April 1st for early admission. So if you want to learn more about that, just Google Global Medical Industry MBA. And seriously though, please get more apps in the door. It helps fund the lab actually in a very indirect way. And with that, I am going to pass the baton over to Tom to introduce our esteemed guests. Thank you. Oh, and just so we remember the rules here, we are on the record from 4:30 Central Time to 5 o'clock. Then we will go off the record, and then when you want to ask a question, make sure you take your camera, put your camera on, or put your hand up so we can know who to call upon as we go. Thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Okay. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Why don't we just get to know you a little bit and then get into some of the trends that we want to discuss. But Medtech, Steve and I are in Minneapolis. We live and breathe Medtech. You're out in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of Medtech out there. How did you get involved in healthcare and specifically get into Medtech?
Sure. Well, truth be told, I'm down the street from you now. So was in Silicon Valley for almost a decade, but have been in MedTech Mecca here in Minneapolis the last 7 years. But to your point, I got started in kind of a unique way. I first started my career in consumer marketing, working on car launches, new cell phones, kids' toys. And on 9/11, I was in New York for a conference when the Twin Towers were attacked in the world. And all of our places in it immediately looked and felt really different. It took me over a week to get home. I took a 4-day trip from New York to Chicago on a Greyhound bus. And then I rented a car and drove the rest of the way to Los Angeles. So on that trip, I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do with my life, what these events really meant, and how I wanted to contribute in a positive way to the world. Not that working with the Power Rangers wasn't super positive and rewarding, but I thought there might be something bigger out there. So I began to do my research, and I found a consulting firm solely focused in healthcare in Los Angeles, which I thought was really inspiring and interesting. And I convinced them to take a chance on me, someone with no healthcare experience. And I promised to help them shape their plans to go direct to patient, which at the time was really new for MedTech. And so I spent the better part of a year with an anatomy book under my arm, going from meeting to meeting, trying to understand things like where and what an aorta was. And I took that role in April of 2002 and have never turned back. I believe that, each day in this business, a life is impacted, and it's been an amazing ride. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Steve, you want to talk about a trend?
Yeah, well, I'll have Angela tell us about trend, because we actually have a pretty good attendance right now. We're cruising at 35. So I think people we're going to reel them off. We're 5 minutes in. So Angela, you're going to talk about our top tech trends that we see in 2022, I believe. So give us a drum roll and tell us one or two of them.
All right.
And Tom and I will be Tom and Steve.
Well, I can wax poetically on this forever. So guys, do stop me and interrupt, and let's have a conversation and ask questions. Yeah. I think if there can be a silver lining in a pandemic for our industry, it's that innovation has taken on a whole new urgency. And this flurry of excitement in health tech has spawned all of these new tools to take control of health and well-being in a lot of different ways. And my hope is that this momentum continues and that we're breeding a new era of entrepreneurs and innovators that will continue to seek out a lot of the questions, that haven't yet been asked. And in a world, I think now where everything is on demand, it's nice to see that managing our healthcare is becoming no exception. So, I think it's easy to say that 2022 will continue to be all about the personalization of care and health information. And there's, but across a lot of different industry verticals. So the first one, that I love looking at is what's happening in genetic testing, DNA sequencing, genomics, gene editing. I like what I'm seeing with Grail, with its recent reacquisition by Illumina to continue to grow in the early, cancer diagnostic market. While there's a long road ahead for them for full FDA approval for the Gallery test, I think it's amazing that we are going to experience, an annual blood test that could test for over 50 cancers, all at one time. I love Exact Sciences in this space. I have loved them since they launched their TV ads featuring little CG, the personified Cologuard kit for at-home colon cancer screening. They continue to grow from the original solo screening test now to getting into hereditary cancer with its acquisition announcement of Prevention Genetics. All good proactive information that patients and their providers can act on. Equally, though, in this space, I think the Prevention acquisition will put a little competitive pressure on Invitae, another favorite of mine. But they're also continuing to grow by acquisition and also in the hereditary cancer space and in genetic testing across a lot of different areas. So I think we'll see some strong integration from them this year. And then, last but not least, at least in this area of industry, you can't talk genomics without talking or commenting on CRISPR. My crystal ball tells me that, while the past half century has been focused on the microchip and digital tools and technologies, will our children be moving from studying digital code to genetic code? I think that, it's a really fascinating area. And, while our community continues to wrestle with all of the ethics and the biohacking powers that we have by virtue of the CRISPR technology, how amazing will it be if we could be less susceptible to viruses or prevent mental health issues like depression? So I think we're going to see a lot of continued acceleration and a lot of trial data, hopefully, coming to light in this space. There's one for you, Steve.
I saw one of I have a preview of some of these trends. I know I wanted you to get to. I'm going to have you skip ahead to one of them, to telehealth, but I'm going to set it up for you and sort of say,
Okay.
It was interesting to learn that you got involved back with Medtronic's CareLink way back when with remote monitoring. And so I totally agree with the point that you made about, telehealth has really taken COVID probably really definitely made telehealth come alive a little bit more. But tell me where you think this is, and do you think that, given that CareLink had great promise, I mean, I teach it in a case, but I put it in the context of, there's like statements like, by the end of the decade, we will have X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, thank God they didn't mention what decade. So,
Yes, what is old is new again, I think, when it comes to tele everything and remote monitoring. Obviously the pandemic has, allowed us to achieve some healthcare milestones that, many of us have been long, working towards and have a lot of scars around to get this kind of technology adopted. So, another silver lining to see that the pandemic helped open everyone's eyes to, how safe and convenient healthcare can be delivered, remotely, and how patients, can be managed remotely. But to your point, I was on the launch team in 2005 when we tried to launch CareLink, and had a plethora of patient compliant issues, a lot of questions about where and how the data was going to be transmitted over the telephone line to the physician's office. And so, with what has happened, not only with telehealth and the billions of dollars that have been invested from venture capital over the last couple of years to innovate, I think we're going to see the trend continue to stick around. I think, this year innovation will likely come in the form of cybersecurity. I think we have to figure out, how health systems manage data and medication management, I think, as well. And I think that, when you consider that we now have this shortage of physicians, dropping out of the care system during the pandemic, coupled with all of the patient access issues, childcare, work days, rural area, transportation issues, and just ease of use, I do think we're going to continue to see, telehealth continue to grow, and see that, improving patient outcomes. We now just need the regulatory and reimbursement environment to be conducive to this kind of growth, to be continued.
That's actually a big issue going on right now, because as some know, I worked in the previous administration and we relaxed an awful lot. So we conducted an experiment. The question is, what can we, some of it has been put back on, but I mean, some of these things are really still in a pretty proprietary way. I mean, why can't, for example, physicians actually do work across state lines? That would potentially solve some of the access issues that are there. And we're kind of, yes, medical licensing is important, but at the same time, all the physicians take a common exam as they move through their step exams. So there's already some elements of standardization, and so it's those things become major rate limiters in terms of really getting the full power. Tom, I'm going to turn it to you if that's all right.
Yeah, no, just a couple of comments since we're discussing the trends that are going on. Angela and I agree that the whole biotech, biogenome revolution is a trend that's going to continue. I remember when the first biotech revolution came through, and it was a lot of little technologies, and it was hard to really figure out from a stock picker standpoint, from a Wall Street perspective, how this was going to work, who was going to make the money, and how it was going to get paid for. And over the period of 20 to 30 years, that's obviously become clear to everyone. There's lots and lots of biotech. They far outnumber the medtech companies probably by 10 or 50 to 1. And they continue to not only get investment, but also get products out that are helpful. I like what Angela said about our children going from computer coding to genome coding. I think that's absolutely right. I know we're not here to, give our favorite books or movies or albums, but the best book I read last year was Isaacson's book on Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize for the CRISPR technology. It's called The Code Breaker. The only reason I mention that on this call is because I think that's a primer for people in medtech right now to read and say, okay, I need to be aware of what's coming next and how we're going to fit in with our technology and this technology into the new healthcare environment. On telehealth, I just read an interview with a large hospital CEO, hospital system CEO, and he said everything that you want to hear about, it's positive and it saves time and money, etc. But he thought that 2022 was going to be a down year, mostly because things that had a lot of impetus in 2021 and 2020 have fallen down a little bit. The inertia is starting to take place. I know on a personal level, my copays were higher with my virtual meetings than they were with live. And I think a lot of things from a reimbursement and just how healthcare providers are going to do business and charge for it and get paid for it rather than having a direct in the office. I'm personally a big believer. I challenge some of the doctors that I know as to whether or not AI can't do a better job at diagnosing and prescribing than the average doctor. Of course, the doctors I talk to are above average, but the average doctor may or may not do as well as an up-to-date supercomputer. With that said, tell us a little bit more about what you see. You know, the pandemic gave us an insight to regulatory, gave us an insight to some of this biotech technology that's going on, and obviously the telehealth. What outside of a pandemic do you see as far as trends going forward, Angela?
Sure. Just one last comment on the last point you made. I do think that there's places in the market where we may have been a little bloated or a little bullish on certain telehealth technologies. You know, Teladoc had some interesting fluctuations in their stock performance during their JP Morgan presentation. For that reason, yeah, I think it's a positive indication that CMS extended inclusion of telehealth services through December of 2023. So hopefully, Tom, maybe that means that some of the private payers will follow suit and those copays will go down, giving, you know, us some additional time to really test this ground. But what I think is cool about this race is that, you know, in addition to the large players and the startups in telehealth and remote monitoring, we're seeing innovation from non-traditional health players, which should also make, I think, the technology more digestible. You know, here in our backyard, Best Buy acquired Current Health for at-home telehealth and monitoring last year, and Amazon, you know, continues to explore the space with Alexa Together, which they launched in December. Which, you know, for me with aging parents, is, you know, outstanding to have a subscription service designed to help us, you know, check in on elderly family at home. So, you know, I think that the space has its challenges in terms of how's all this data going to come together? What do the end-to-end solutions look like? How are we going to manage and control some of the payment, you know, and participation? But, you know, wouldn't it be amazing if, you know, instead of having a transactional 2-minute relationship with a provider, you could transform that relationship into a true partnership, and it would be more well care than sick care. And I think that there's, if we can do this right, to me, it's the holy grail of where we've been trying to go in this industry for some time. So we'll have to do this talk again next year, see where we're at next January. You know, things that aren't pandemic related, I'm really bullish on the democratization of surgery and femtech this year. I think those are two really promising categories that have also seen a lot of market engagement and acquisition, that are ripe for continued growth and innovation.
Say a little bit more about the surgery democratization, because that just actually having those two words come together sort of struck me as kind of interesting. So what are the action items to make that work?
Yeah, I mean, you know, what I think is, you know, an opportunity, and it has been for some time. It's just, you know, whether or not we're going to innovate. And I think the last couple of years with movement from Medtronic and J&J picking up some early stage companies, we've seen more momentum here. So when I say democratization of surgery, I'm talking about leveling the playing field of surgeon skill through the use of robotics, imaging, navigation, so that surgeons, regardless of location, training, skill level, get similar outcomes. and improved outcomes. And so, with companies like Medtronic, Intuitive Surgical, who was, the market maker initially, and then Medtronic followed suit. J&J's always had a lot of, surgical tools and technologies, but their growth and acquisition of Auris, and then their partnership with Verily in Verb, with them exiting, with Verily exiting that partnership, I think that J&J is like the likely company, in my opinion, to create a dynasty here. This space is hard. It's not without challenges. Product development is hard. Clinical trials in these complex technologies tend to be a little weighty, but I think leaders with track records of success in these competitive areas will remain in demand. And just another kind of level of AI in our healthcare system.
So there's a part of me that's a policy guy. Do you think to make the democratization work, all the policy rails are there? Is there anything going to be blocking them? Because a lot of the innovation is that balance between inpatient, hospital outpatient, ambulatory surgery, even medical tourism to a certain extent. Is there anything that's going to block that from taking off, do you think?
Cost.
Okay.
I think that we have to, look at how we can take these really complex, surgical robotics and make it palatable for every, large health system, rural hospital, to put the tools in the hands of not only, the people that need them most in this country, but globally. And until we can, have it at a price point in a surgical suite that, doesn't take up a heck of a huge footprint, I think that it's going to be hard to really see it proliferate.
I just added to the chat the top 5, just so people are keeping a running total, and as we go through this great conversation. I'm curious about femtech, only because I watched the $6 Million Man, and I remember the fembots that came out at Soundlight too. I mean, we're all maybe. Sorry, that's embarrassing to me. It sounds like Letterman at this point. But tell us more about that. What do you see in that innovation? And again, are there barriers to that taking off too?
I really hope this is the year of femtech. I think we've been saying it for some time, but I think there's a couple of things pointing this year that we might finally be getting into this market in a real way. If you look at some of the venture dollars from 2020 to 2021, we saw venture capital double in femtech beyond just reproductive health into menopause, chronic conditions for women. So I think that's really exciting to see that there's some dollars fueling innovation in femtech. The other big thing that is critical for success in this area that I was also pleased to see over the last 12 or 18 months is femtech companies and their CEOs breaking the proverbial glass ceiling when it comes to social media advertising. It's kind of a dark secret in our industry that platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites have been blocking feminine and femtech company content as inappropriate or explicit, which could be nothing's further from the truth. So they've been spending a lot of time, at Meta and meeting with the social platforms, educating them and talking to them about allowing, femtech companies to appropriately produce content for their sites, which I think, is an opportunity to reduce the stigma surrounding women's health issues as, taboo topics that we don't talk about. But it also allows them to reach a really important target audience, which, are living their lives on Facebook. So I'm pretty bullish this year that we'll start to see some better gender equity and innovation in feminine health. I
would agree with that, Angela. It's a big market. It has not gotten the attention that it should have over the years from an investment standpoint. It's doubling, but it's doubling off a base that's too small, right? So it'd be nice if it doubled, 3 or 4 more times. But you also see little things like half of the med school classes being female now. And as they get out and have been getting out into the market, you don't have quite the same male bias that we've had in past years. The other thing is, yes, there's startups that are doing this, venture that's doing this, but I would suggest that we're not going to create any large femtech multinational companies, that these successful ones will be acquired. And then you have to talk about, what's the platform for distribution? How does this fit in strategically? There's lots of ways to do that, but at the big companies, they have to start paying, I think, a little bit more attention. Maybe I'm speaking a little bit too ahead of my skis here, but a little bit more attention to the overall strategy of a focus on women's health that has not been there. Part of it is, go back to your Washington days, Steve. I can't tell you the exact date, but it's a lot more recent than you'd think. Women were barred from being in clinical trials because who knew if they were pregnant or not, and what would this do if this implant of whatever type would do to this? Well, that's been solved now, but we still have decades of clinical trials that did not include female participants. So that needs some catching up, and you're going to have the technological push from the VCs and the startups, but I think the big companies have to look at this and say, what are we going to do? Is this separate, or is this integrated into overall health and not worry about gender? I think it's more the former, but we'll see.
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead, Angela. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think there's 2 other pressures that could help drive Tom to exactly what you're saying. And that's really on, the consolidation that's going to be happening that, happens every time there's a crisis, right? M&A is a critical part of winning in a crisis situation, similar to what we're in. And the companies that, when we look back at, between, 07 and 17, the acquisitions over that 10-year period through the financial crisis, those companies had better returns than those that didn't make frequent acquisitions. Healthcare companies like, that made really industry defining deals during the last downturn, have really reaped, great benefit. One that I'm thinking about being probably one of the biggest is the Roche acquisition of Genentech. So when you think about what's going to happen now as a result of the politics, bureaucracy, and challenges of the pandemic on our health system, I think that the larger health system groups and investors will accelerate their acquisition of smaller hospitals, ambulatory care, physician practices, as a result of just sheer financial pressure from the pandemic and the drop, which includes the drop in procedure volumes during the pandemic that keeps, the lights on at most hospitals. But then what comes with consolidation of health systems and hospitals is the impact that has on medtech. So, they have to then, there's then fewer people that we're selling to. The big medtech companies, with category leadership positions and an opportunity to bundle and negotiate bundled pricing, are going to have to go deeper and wider across different health verticals. So my hope is that they'll be in a position and required to kind of force their hand into women's health in a more real fashion in order to, pick up those products to add depth to their portfolio. So I think those could be 2 interesting pressure points in the femtech space that actually help the acceleration. We'll see.
all pretty exciting stuff. We noted it all in the chat, and we are at 5 o'clock, which means we are about to go off the record.